Hi, I'm Mike Hamilton. This is NewsJacker. So here we are in what used to be my office in Bremerton, and I got kicked out of my office. And this is what happens to founders. All of a sudden the company grows and we need space and I gotta go. So since I'm spending a lot of my time on airplanes and hotels anyway, it's not that big of a deal, but I realize it's a whole lot less interesting behind me than it was before. So let me quickly tell you a little bit about the company. We just came out in the Gartner guide for managed detection and response. And apparently the Gartner analysts were impressed with all the times that we've sat down with them and talked about our differentiators and how we separate regulated, non-regulated data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, how we train our analysts using PICES. They were impressed. I don't know if a magic quadrant is coming out. If it does, we want to be in it. So now on to this week in stolen data. There is a lot of legal wrangling about the limit of what insurance will cover every time there is a data breach. And the role of third-party consultants, both of those have just come up. So a bank in Virginia was compromised over an 8-month period by what we think are Russian organized criminals, and they stole $2.5 million. The most interesting thing about this one is that the bank is suing its insurance provider for refusing to fully cover losses. We don't know what's under the covers there. I think they didn't like their controls. In the irony department, LifeLock. LifeLock is the company that watches your online data for signs of financial fraud and other identity theft issues. Well, it had a bug in its website that allowed anyone with a browser to grab email addresses on millions of customer accounts, which will likely be weaponized for financial fraud and identity theft. You can't make that stuff up. Boys Town National Research Hospital has reported the largest breach of a pediatric facility. Worse than the size, there's only about 140,000 records. Worse than the size is what they lost. A combination of health data, personally identifiable information, financial details, and authentication credentials. I think the message there is monitor better. Put those fires out when they're small, because that's a big fire. In regulation, New York continues to make news, breaking new ground with its regulation for the financial sector. Now in scope, credit reporting agencies. So Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, those are the main targets, but not exclusively. I will note that the discussion about the differences in allowing market forces rather than regulation to adjudicate security in credit reporting agencies is all but moot. Because if market forces worked, there would be no... Slightly oblique to regulation, Heartland. We all remember Heartland, and its insurer are suing Trustwave. Trustwave is a consulting company that signed off on a PCI security assessment for Heartland. Lexington, the insurance company, paid out something like $30 million to resolve the security issues, conduct public reporting, comply with all the requirements, and now they want some of that back from the company that said everything was up to code. My bet is that this is sending chills through every security consulting company in the United States right now. And speaking of the United States, here's a few things on the US government. So the president does not seem to be taking the threat of election security as seriously as just about everyone else in government. Congress has asked for a commission to create a comprehensive cyber defense strategy. This would give Congress a more direct hand in ensuring that information security leadership is adequately resourced. It is not right now, and that strategies are actually being developed. So we'll see if that legislation goes anywhere. Remember, legislation's got to be signed by the president. In the same vein, the head of the NSA has taken a unilateral step to collaborate with other agencies in developing a response to any upcoming attempts to penetrate election systems, steal voter rolls, change registration information, and otherwise just cause chaos, which is really the goal there. It's chaos. This is somewhat unprecedented, with federal agencies taking steps to compensate for an executive that does not execute. Lastly, on the US government, there's more and more talk about retaliation, and not so much on what that retaliation would actually look like. So the Senate Armed Services Committee, as part of the fiscal 2019 budget, are rumbling that we should use offensive cyber attacks on countries that disrupt the normal functioning of our democracy. Setting aside the fact that we walked away from normally functioning democracy a couple of years ago, this discussion will likely come to a resolution but be classified, so we're not going to know what they're going to do. That's okay. As an opinion, I'll say this. I see no reason that our logical borders cannot be treated as an analog to our physical borders, meaning that there's a standard of behavior that you need to maintain if you want to go over that point, or no access. So we cut off all network commerce with countries that look the other way on pervasive organized crime. Those countries would probably find a way to very quickly solve the problem in order to preserve their legal businesses that need American supply chain and consumers. Why this is never part of the discussion is a complete mystery to me. Now other governments, nation states. This activity is always on the uptick, and it's always getting scarier. So the Iranians are back on the radar. They are engaged in espionage with two campaigns called Leaf Miner and Oil Rig. I have no idea if they have anything to do with leaves or oil. Simple phishing and email account takeover appear to be the goal, but this can quickly escalate. Given the rhetoric being thrown around by the president, our violation of the terms of the nuclear agreement with Iran, et cetera, et cetera. We're just going to have to watch this. They are skilled, they have capabilities, and we're probably going to see what those look like soon. Singapore, always an innovator, has cut off internet access for public healthcare workers, having already done this for government employees a couple of years ago. The reason is the attack on Singapore Health disclosed more than 1 million records. Singapore should be commended. If you cannot interact with the internet, you've raised the cost for your adversaries to the extent that they are very likely to move on to the next target. Good job, Singapore, making 40% of the problem go off a cliff. Russians, you knew this was coming, seem to have shifted their efforts and tactics. Yes, there are a couple of people in Congress, notably Democrats in vulnerable seats, who are having their staff phished. They have to know that the radar is way up and they don't want to be clearly identified in hacking the election. And this activity is actually pretty low, less than what we expected. More significantly, the focus seems to be all on the power grid. Homeland Security has been continuing to send out warnings about this, as well as vulnerable ERP systems. Ordinarily, we become kind of numb to this. We call this a day of the week ending in Y. Yeah, Russians are doing everything they can to get in the energy grid. Okay, we know that, we've known that for years, etc. But there's a piece of information that came up over the weekend, combined with the fact that this seems to be changing tactics, that makes this a bit more sinister. Just prior to the Helsinki summit, Russia liquidated almost all of its holdings in U.S. Treasury securities. What are they forecasting? Privacy and surveillance. So yes, we got the Carpenter ruling from the Supreme Court of the U.S. last month. That ruling says that phone location and movement data are subject to Fourth Amendment protections. You gotta have a warrant. All right, that's cool. However, already a post-Carpenter ruling says call records aren't content or cell site location information, thus no Fourth Amendment protection. That has to do with something called the third-party doctrine. So I'm just going to leave that there for now because this is going to be bumpy. This is going to be in the courts for a while. Yes, California has a new strict law on internet privacy, which gives residents the right to know what data is collected by companies like Google and Facebook, and request that their information is not sold to third parties. Awesome. Big tech is pushing back on this as hard as they can. Really, given the opportunity, just about everyone would say, yeah, don't sell my data. That becomes an existential crisis for companies that predicate their revenue based on ads, right? We gotta do creepy tracking, we gotta sell that information so you can get that ad for that knife or whatever. This is gonna end up in courts, but it's pretty clear where things are going. We're all getting tired of being the product. On the flip side of that, there's a difference between how privacy is considered in the United States versus, for example, China. And our reluctance to provide data may end up being a detriment to competition. How, you ask? Because China can collect whatever damn data it wants, and it has the data to create training sets for artificial intelligence and machine learning to which we will not have access. Since business funds about 72% of the R&D in the US, hobbling business from collecting data means we're going to fall further behind just because we want our privacy. Lastly on privacy, and this is from the, this is getting creepy department, federal air marshals have been tasked with conducting surveillance on Americans that are not on any watch list and using criteria for selection that are largely unknown. Extensive information on movement is being collected, and it's not clear why. This seems the slipperiest of slopes, and one that, if unchecked, will get the US to begin to consider data collection much in the way that the Chinese do. We don't need any laws. We are the law. Okay, and lastly, here's a bonus for you. There was a good article last month on data manipulation and how that's going to be the next big thing. So we talk about the CIA triad in the information security business: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We've all been nearly 100% focused on confidentiality. Nobody wants unauthorized disclosure. The I is becoming more important in that CIA, and that's one reason Health and Human Services has required covered entities under HIPAA to report all ransomware events. If I can encrypt your data, I can change it. Data manipulation can move markets, can ruin a product launch or a drug under development, or be used to directly harm someone. So for example, by removing a reference to an allergy to a drug. So to me, blockchain is a good way to address this vulnerability. The distributed ledger must agree that the data is what it was the last time we checked, or we don't use it. And now, since I made a reference to blockchain, my job here is done. Thank you. I'm Mike Hamilton. This is NewsJacker.